If you have a desire to become a better version of your current self, then this podcast is for you. I share with you helpful thoughts, tips, and stories around fitness and self-improvement, which you can apply to your life today. For those of you that want to take control of your life, to learn, to grow, to become that which you desire most, I'm your host, Connor Malone, and this is the pursuit of constant improvement. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking to you about muscle growth and weight training, how we can optimize both of them for you and your life today. Now, when it comes to weight training, of course, one of the main reasons we do it is to build muscle, is to improve the way we look, but also to improve the way we feel. The health benefits we get from weight training are profound. People don't really realize that, but what happens when we optimize our weight training is we don't only look a lot better, but we open the doors to the health benefits, the wide array of health benefits that resistance training or weight training offers. So that's what we're going to dive into today. I hope you enjoy this episode because there's a lot of things to cover, a lot of myths to bust. So we'll get straight into it. Now, one of the first things I want to cover is actually how muscle grows, because this is one of the most understood things about weight training in general. What people think is when you go into a gym, the main thing is to break down a muscle so it recovers, it builds more of it, and we get bigger, we get stronger on top of it. Now, that all sounds great that we break down a muscle, it repairs, and it gets bigger after it. However, that isn't actually the case. That's one of the biggest myths out there, because even when I went through my first 3 years of college, that is the type of stuff that was getting taught to you. That is the information that's out there. However, over the past few years, a lot of research has came out and it's actually shown us what really drives muscle growth, and that is what we're going to go over in today's episode. Now, how muscle growth works in a very simple matter, because what I want to do today is I want to try and simplify this for you guys, because I'm gonna say a lot of big words. I'm gonna try my very best to simplify them for you. But in the most simplest form, what we do with weight training is we lift weights, we stimulate muscle growth, we eat protein, and we recover. Okay, that then builds muscle. However, it's not from the muscle damage. That is not where we build muscle. So again, I'll repeat that. What people think is we go into the gym, we lift weights, that creates these wee tears in a muscle. Those tears then rebuild and come back stronger. However, that isn't quite how it works, as I'm about to explain. So one example of this would be is, see if you think of a marathon runner, they create a lot of muscle damage, okay, because of the impact. The muscles do lengthen and shorten very, very like a little amount, a lot throughout a 2, 3, 4 hour period. And what happens there is they create a lot of muscle damage. So what we'd think is, well, why aren't marathon runners more muscular? Why aren't they bigger? Because that isn't what drives muscle growth. It's not muscle damage. So that's just one thing to remember there. If you actually have a think about that, you might think, that does make a little bit of sense. There's a lot of science to back up, of course, what I'm going to go over today. But the main thing that we're going to talk about is something called mechanical tension. Okay, now those are two quite big words. I'm not expecting you to remember them or even really understand what that is. But the main thing that we want to know is that this mechanical tension, or we'll just call it tension, is something that's picked up in a muscle and it then stimulates a growth process. So what I mean by that is what we want to do with weight training is we create this tension in a muscle that then triggers these effects, which then allows us to grow muscle on top of it. So again, all we're trying to do with weight training is create that signal in the body that then tells the brain to kickstart these processes and build muscle on top of it. And that tension is mechanical, okay? Mechanical tension it's called. Now, there's a very good quote. If you've ever researched muscle growth before, you've ever looked it up on YouTube, you'll likely have found this guy called Jeff Nippard. And he has an excellent video explaining what mechanical tension is and how muscles actually grow. And one of his quotes goes like this. He says, as of now, tension remains absolutely undisputed as the primary driver of hypertrophy, which is muscle growth, within the scientific community at large. So all he's saying there is, without doubt, this mechanical tension that we speak of is what drives muscle growth. So what I'm now about to explain to you is exactly a little bit more about what that is, but mainly how can you stimulate that? How can you get that tension in order to let your muscles grow? Well, that's what we're going to go over. So there's a lot of main principles, okay? Because again, like I said, it's this tension we're creating in this muscle that then causes this cascade of biochemical effects that then builds the muscle. But in simple terms, there's a few things that we can do to make sure that that happens. Now, to create this tension, one of the most important things is progressive overload. Might be something you've heard of before. Now, in simple terms, all that is when we have a set weight or a set exercise, and what we do is we increase the reps, we increase the weight over a given period of time. So let's say you're in the gym and you're doing a squat, and you squat 60 kilos for 10 reps. Okay. The next session you come in, you might get 11 reps. Then you might get 12 reps in the session after that. And then what you would eventually do is you would move up the weight. That is what we call progressive overload. Now, that is one of the main and most important things you need to be doing with your weight training. If you're aiming to progressively overload for your weight training sessions, that is how you'll create that stimulus, mechanical tension, in order to grow. So a very important one there. So when you look at your weight training, make sure you're not just going in the gym and lifting weights and not even tracking what weights you're doing. As best you can, track the weights that you're lifting, try and keep to the same exercises, and try and progressively overload them. So try and increase the reps first. Once you've increased the reps to a set amount, then you can increase the weight, or the load as we call it. Once you do that, you're going to keep this kind of process going, this progressive overload, and you're going to continue to provide the stimulus to build muscle. So that is one of the main things that your training should be centered around. Now, one of the most important things again here is going to be something called a proximity to failure. Now, again, I'll simplify that for you. So your proximity is how close you are to something. Okay, failure has been when something cuts out, that is it gone completely. So in the sense of weight training, a proximity to failure is how far we are from not being able to do any more reps. So if you imagine you're doing an exercise and you're at your 10th rep and you're really, really pushing, okay, you push up, you get that rep done, maybe you've got one more rep, that is a close proximity to failure. You're really close to not being able to, when you're pushing the weight up, you fail and the weight just comes down on you. That is failure. That is a point of failure. So we need to be training close to that point of failure, because that point of failure is a very, very important thing in creating tension in a muscle. If we're training too far away from failure, we're not going to create this tension. We're not going to grow muscles. Okay, we're not going to trigger these responses in the body that allows us to grow and get bigger and stronger. Now, that is one of the main reasons why some classes aren't actually that effective for building muscle. Because what you're doing is, yeah, you're lifting a lot of weights, like a lot of times. However, a lot of the time you're nowhere near failure. You're near your heart rate's sky high. You're training your cardiovascular system, but your muscles aren't failing. We need to get close to that point of failure. Now, that doesn't mean with every exercise you should be trying to push until you cannot do any more reps, but you should be, as a guideline, within 2 or 3 reps of failure. That is a really good guideline to go with. Now, in the research that we have at the moment, we're quite unsure of how far away from failure you can train and still stimulate muscle growth. However, what we do know for sure is we need to be training as close to that as possible, okay, in the sense of 2 or 3 reps and sometimes even up into failure. Once you do that, you'll stimulate muscle growth, okay? So that is 2 of the most important things we've went over. One of the next ones, that this kind of links into one of the questions I'm asked the most as a personal trainer, and it's in the sense of volume. Now, what volume means is the total number of sets and reps that we do. So some people are like, right, so how many sets do I do? How many reps do I do? Now, it's a very, very valid question. One of the guidelines I'm going to give you, and you can think about this and see if you're maybe roughly within these guidelines already, is in terms of sets, we want to be doing between 10 and 20 sets per muscle group per week. Now, let's take the chest, for example. Okay, so if you're going in and one of your weight training sessions is an upper body training session, maybe you do 2 chest exercises. Okay, maybe you do 3 sets of each. So that's 6 sets of chest in one session. If you do that twice per week, that's 12 sets per week. So you're within the guideline. Now, again, that's a very rough guideline. What we've found in the research is that 10 to 20 sets is ideal for most people. However, some people respond better to more volume, so more sets, more reps, and some people respond better to less volume. Okay, so maybe you're just verging on those 10 sets per week. But that is a good guideline to go off of. So if you think of that, 10 to 20 sets per muscle group per week. If you get that into your training program, you should be on the right path with that. Now, important thing in the sense of reps, again, because people always ask me, like, how many reps should I be doing? Should I be doing 8 to 12 reps? Should I be doing less reps and more weight? Or should I be doing more weight and less reps? Now, it's good to provide a combination of both within your weight training. However, one thing is very important to understand. It does not matter how many reps you do up to a point, in the sense that there's loads of research showing that we can stimulate just as much muscle growth doing 30 or even 40 reps of an exercise as if we were doing 5. Okay, so a rough guideline is between 5 and 30 reps. If you're in there, that anywhere within that rep range is good, if you're training close to failure. So that's us going back to one of our first points, that proximity to failure. So again, don't worry about how many reps you're doing necessarily. The main thing you should focus on with that is how close you are to failure. So if you're doing 5 reps or you're doing 30 reps, as long as within the last rep you're almost at failure, That is one of the most important things when it comes to picking how many reps you're doing. So keep that in mind when you're doing that. Now, another thing that's really important with weight training is your rest periods. Because what people do is they'll see people online and they'll be like, wow, their workout looks really intense, so it must be really good. So we've already covered the fact that muscle damage doesn't cause muscle growth. Okay, so your goal with going into the gym shouldn't be to damage the muscle as much as possible and lift as much weight as possible. That is not how we're going to get growth. That's not how we're going to achieve a better physique. Okay, so what you should do when you're in the gym is you're actually going to aim for longer rest periods. So let's say you do a set of bench press. Okay, you do 10 reps and you're close to failure, you finish your set. What you would like to do now is rest between 2 and 3 minutes. Okay, because what happens is if you only rest a minute, there's still basically, I don't want to overcomplicate things, but there's a couple of things that haven't quite recovered in the muscle yet. So there's a lot of lactic acid in there. However, by giving it 2 to 3 minutes, we're allowing a lot of that lactic acid to be removed. Okay, so again, if you do a set of 10 reps, you wait 1 minute, you go again. Good luck. You'll probably get maybe 7, maybe 8 reps if you're lucky. However, if you wait 2 to 3 minutes, you go again, there's a good chance you'll get 9. You might even get 10, okay? And that's going to create more tension, therefore potentially more growth. So very important there. If you've ever wondered how much rest should I take between my exercises, roughly between 2 and 3 minutes seems to be a good point. So make sure you take that into effect when you're going into your next weight training sessions. Now, all the things I've covered there are really what you should focus on when you're in the gym, like how you structure your weight training sessions in the terms of like sets and reps, exercises and stuff. One of the other really important things, of course, is your nutrition and your recovery. Because you might do all the work in the gym, okay? But if you're not recovering properly, you have zero chance of growing muscle. Okay, now 2 really important things with nutrition. One of them being is calorie intake, okay? If you're not consuming enough calories, you're going to make it very difficult for your body to build muscle. Muscle building is what we call an energy intensive process. Now, all that simply means is it does take quite a profound amount of energy for us to build muscle. So if you're not giving your body enough energy, you're not going to build muscle. So if you're really wanting to optimize muscle growth, you'd be in what we call a calorie surplus. Okay, that's surplus of calories. Now, with a surplus of calories, what that means is you're burning more you're consuming more calories in any given day than you're burning. Okay, so let's say you burn 2,000 calories in a day. If you consume 2,300, you've got excess calories there. Okay, now your body will still store some of body fat as body fat, but what that's going to do is help you build a little bit more muscle. So if you're really wanting to optimize things, we eat in that calorie surplus. However, the next most important thing is, now this is if you're in a calorie deficit, you're eating at a maintenance level, you're in a surplus, it doesn't matter, is your protein intake. If you're not eating enough protein, you cannot possibly build muscle. Because in its simplest form, muscles are built by lifting weights and eating protein. Okay, that protein then recovers. It builds that muscle back once we've stimulated it to grow. So a very important thing there. Now, in terms of protein, how much you should eat, a really good guideline is 0.8 to 1 grams of protein per pound of body weight. Okay, so if you weigh, very simply put, if you weigh 180 pounds, you eat 1 gram per pound of body weight, you would eat 180 grams of protein per day. Now again, that's a very rough estimate, but it's a good one for most people. It's suitable for most, unless you're extremely overweight, then you can go based off what we call your lean body mass. But that is another conversation for another day. So for most people, if you go based off 1 gram per pound of body weight, that will do you well. It will serve you very well. Now, one thing that a lot of people ask me in the terms is with fasting and muscle growth, because fasting is becoming ever more popular nowadays, and people tend to say, well, can I fast and still build muscle? And the short answer is yes, we definitely can. Is it optimal? Probably not. However, what's been seen in the research is that as long as you're getting your protein intake from around 3 or 5 meals a day, you're going to need enough optimized muscle growth. So it doesn't mean you need to be eating 6 or 7 meals a day with 20 grams of protein or whatever. If you're having, let's say, 3 big meals a day and they're spaced a few hours apart, you're going to need enough optimized muscle growth, which means you could, in essence, fast in the morning. So if you feel better, you feel healthier doing that, then go ahead and do it. However, what I tend to find is if I've not eaten in the morning, I tend not to be as strong, but that can vary from individual. So if that's something you ever think about, if you tend to fast with your workouts, don't worry about it. Try and get a good meal in with your first meal of the day, though. A lot of protein in that. But as we've covered, calorie intake, protein intake, both essential nutrition-wise. Now, in terms of recovery, when we mostly think of recovery, we think of sleep. Now, what we want to aim for is between 7 and 8 hours of sleep per night. We see that number thrown around all the time, but again, that's because it has significant amount of evidence backing it up. Because muscle building, although it works around the clock, this process called muscle protein synthesis, it is heightened, it's elevated when we sleep. Okay, so our recovery really, really elevates when we sleep. That's when our body's completely rested, doesn't need to worry about you moving about. It can really focus on recovery. So you need to be getting good quality sleep. If you're getting less than 6 hours sleep a night, you're really going to make it difficult for your body to then build muscle on top of it. Okay, so very important things there with recovery. The next thing we're going to talk about is in terms of actually your training program, your split. How do you split up your training? How do you split that up so it's somewhat optimal for building muscle? Because again, this is one of the questions I get asked most. Okay, what should I train? What muscle should I train on this day? How should I train on this day? And we're going to go over that today. Now, the first thing that I would say no to is something that we call bro splits. Okay, now what a bro split is when we train the muscles that everybody likes. Okay, so in the sense of like your chest and arms. Okay, particularly if you're a young guy, that is the first thing you think of when you're in the gym, training your chest, training your arms, because that's what people see, makes you look bigger. Okay, now the problem with that is what we do is we get crossovers when that happens. Okay, so if we train the chest one day, then the next day we go to train our shoulders. Well, on the first day when we train our chest, our triceps are fatigued because they're a secondary muscle group when we do most chest exercises. But they're the same on a shoulder day. They're a secondary muscle. So what you're doing is you're going into one day fatigued. So you're not going to be able to give it your best. So the best thing to do is we pair muscle groups together, we train them all together, and then we rest before doing that again. So one of the most popular things nowadays is what we call a push-pull legs split. Okay, so you train your pushing muscles, which is your shoulders, your chest, your triceps. You train your pulling muscles, which is your back and your biceps, and then you train your legs in a separate day. That way, there's none of those crossovers that we spoke about. So you're recovering. So you're training push day, then you've got your pull day, then you've got your legs, and then you're going again. You restart the cycle. If you're not training as frequently as that, if you're not training 3 or 6 times a week, what you can do is very simply just an upper body routine and a lower body routine or a full body routine. Let's say you can only get to the gym twice a week. What would be best for you to be to do a full body day? So you train all the major muscle groups in one session, you wait a couple of days, you train again. Because that follows up nicely to my next part, and people always ask, how long should I rest before training the same muscle group again? Now this can vary between individuals, but it tends to be 48 hours. Okay, so if you give 48 hours before training, let's say you train your chest, give it 48 hours, train it again, you're in a really good position to build muscle. If you train your chest every day, you're going to be fatigued. You're not going to be able to focus on progressive overload, which, as we spoke about, is one of the main ways we're going to create that tension in order to build muscle. So very important to keep in mind there. Now, we spoke about earlier how many sets you should be doing per week. So that's something you should keep in mind. If you're aiming to get between 10 and 20 sets per muscle per week, take that in mind when you're going with your split. So if you say, right, well, I can train twice per week, that's why we go with the full body. Because if you go just upper body and then lower body, you're going to have to do a lot of sets on one day and then the other day to actually match that volume. So keep that in mind when you're doing that. Now, when we're picking exercises, what I want to tell you is a few traits of good exercises, because I could ramble all day about this in terms of what's the good exercise, what maybe isn't as efficient and things like that. But very simply, here's a few things that make an exercise good. Now, one of the things is that it's stable. Okay, it gives us stability, because if an exercise is not stable, what happens then is we bring in all the other muscle groups, all these stabilizing muscles, and we can't actually create a significant amount of tension on one specific muscle, which again is what we want. We want to create this tension in order to build muscle. So make sure an exercise is stable. Now, what I mean by that is machines tend to be very good options, because machines keep you stable and they keep you focused on maybe 1 or 2 or 3 muscles at one time, not 10. Okay, because if you think of, if you're working 10 muscles, all that load is spread throughout 10 muscles, you're not going to create a significant degree of tension in one single muscle or enough muscles in order to make them grow. So definitely keep that in mind. Machines are very good options, especially if you're a beginner. Now, one more thing I want to go on into that is range of motion. Now, what that means is, let's say we're on a squat. So if you can imagine somebody doing a squat, okay, they start at the top, they squat down. Now, if they only go halfway down, they only put their muscle through what we call half of its range of motion. So motion is just movement, okay? What we need to do to create tension is make sure a muscle is moving a lot, okay? So it's fully lengthening and then it's fully shortening. That's one of the best ways in order to create tensions. So if you're only half repping with most of your exercises, you're not going to be able to create that tension. So a very important thing you want to consider is, does this exercise allow me to go through a full range of motion? If it does, it could be a good exercise for you. Now, the last thing I want to finish on before I move on to our quotes to finish us off for today is some quick fire questions. Now, I got these questions from two sources, one from a friend and two from an AI bot. Now, this is really interesting. So what you can do online, if you've ever heard of ChatGPT or any of these other programs, you can ask it a question, okay, this artificial intelligence machine, and it pumps out some really, really interesting questions. So what I done was I asked it its questions on muscle growth. What are the most asked questions on muscle growth? And it's asked a few of them here. So if you've got a question lingering, you think, he's not answered that, could be a good chance that I'll answer it here. So I'm not going to go really in depth, but I'm going to try and quickly answer them. We'll move on from there to hopefully answer any of your lingering questions you've got. Now, one of the first ones is to do with supersets and drop sets. All these fancy things that people do, and people look at people doing them, they think, oh, those must be really effective. However, are they? Now, the answer to that is not necessarily, okay? Can they be used to stimulate muscle growth? Yes, particularly if you don't have enough time. Okay, so all a superset is when you do one exercise, you don't rest, and you go straight to another exercise. So as I spoke about earlier, we need a decent amount of rest, 1 to 3 minutes, to be able to produce a lot of power. However, what we can do to combat that is we do maybe one chest exercise, then one back exercise. If you do one chest exercise into another chest exercise, it's not necessarily going to be optimal. However, drop sets, supersets, definitely viable options, but if you're not really in like an advanced trainer, then make sure you're focusing on the fundamentals first. However, they can be a viable option, nothing terrible about them, but again, nothing super really beneficial about them. How many reps for muscle growth? We've really answered that one. That was what the ChatGPT asked us. However, as I spoke about, I really want to highlight this, is it needs to be your proximity to failure needs to be highlighted. Okay, in the sense that you could be doing 5 reps, you could be doing 10 reps, you could be doing 30 reps. However, if you're not close to failure, you will not stimulate muscle growth. So make sure with all the sets you're doing, you're getting close to that point of failure. One that we've almost kind of answered here is with regards to, should you use machines or should you use dumbbells? Now, a combination of both work well. However, as I just mentioned just a few minutes ago, is machines offer a great degree of stability. Okay, stability is going to help you produce more power. More power can create more tension. So potentially a really good option, especially if you're a beginner, is to go with those machines. However, dumbbells can do the same thing. They can create a lot of tension as long as that exercise puts you through a full range of motion, as we discussed earlier. Now, the last question that ChatGPT asked me was, should I be sore? Because people are like, okay, well, surely I have to break down a muscle damage, and I get sore, my muscle rebuilds, and then I get bigger, I get stronger. But we've already highlighted that isn't how muscle growth works. Muscles are not broken down and then built back stronger. Okay, that is not what stimulates muscle growth. As we discussed, it is that tension, mechanical tension that does that. So should you be sore the next day? Now, if you're new to training or you're trying a new program or a new exercise, chances are you'll be pretty sore for the first week or two, in the sense of the first few times of you doing that program. However, after a while, you shouldn't have any soreness. Okay, there's something that we call the repeated bout effect. Now, that is when we repeat exercises for a set number of weeks. Our muscles adapt very quickly to that, in the sense of they don't get sore, because it's the muscle damage that's one of the main components of why we get sore. We want to try and avoid that a little bit. Okay, it's going to happen to some extent, but what we want to focus on is creating that tension. So should you be sore after a couple of weeks? No, you shouldn't. Okay. Now, before I finish with the quote, there is one thing I want to again highlight, which is very, very important. With weight training, there is no substitute for hard work. Because one of the main things I spoke about was that proximity to failure. If you're just going into the gym, like I see a lot of people doing, and I don't blame you because you aren't any of the wiser, you don't have that knowledge yet. If you're one of these people that go in and you just move the weight, you finish a set, and you think, oh, that was a little bit tough, and you move on to the next exercise, that isn't enough. Okay, you need to be training hard. It doesn't need to be to complete failure in every set, but you do need to be training hard. That is a requirement in order to stimulate muscle growth. So if it is one of your goals, make sure that that is your focus. Now, one of the quotes I want to leave with you, a very, very relevant quote to weight training, is from somebody called Gary Vaynerchuk. You've seen some of his videos, business guy, quite motivational. However, this quote works very, very in line with the actual muscle building process. And it's very short and it's very simple. And all he says is, fall in love with patience. It will do you wonders. And with regards to weight training, that is so incredibly true. It is a slow process. It requires a lot of discipline, a lot of pushing yourself through sessions you don't want to do. However, it is more than worth it in the end. The health benefits you get from it, the way that you build muscle and the way that you look from doing that is very much worth it. One quote that also highlights that a little bit more is this: having patience with taking action, yet patience in your pursuit of results. Once you begin to love the process, your success becomes inevitable. Okay, so with taking action, have no patience, take action, get to work. However, with results, you need to be patient. That is a non-negotiable. Okay, I hope you got a lot of value from that. If you did, drop me a DM, let me know what you found valuable, what tips you're going to apply. If you want any more tips with regards to your weight training, feel free to drop me a DM, and what I'll do is I'll send you a voice note back going over any questions that you have asked me. Other than that, as I said, I hope you found value. I hope you apply this to your life and your pursuit of constant improvement. And again, thank you for listening to today's episode.